Hello, everyone. Welcome to your newest episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host, myself, Laura Matsu, and my husband, Bernhard Gunther. And today we're going to dive into a really big topic. It's going to be about NPCs, soulless humans, and agent Smiths. We have a lot to dive into. But before we get into that, I want to make a quick announcement. Our best-selling psychospiritual group program, Embodied Soul Awakening, is going to be available as a 5-month self-paced online journey for those who want to create deep changes within their lives and embody who they really are. So whether you're new to inner work or you've been in this game for a while and just need some extra support and a tune-up, we have this great program of holistic self-work to give you really everything you need to have a huge upgrade in your life, in mind, body, and spirit. So this fourfold approach in the program will focus on physical, psychological, emotional areas of your life, intellectual, and spiritual. So we really try to cover all the bases. The physical, we're going to be focusing on weekly yoga, meditation practices, qigong to help you clear stuck energy in the body and support your mind-body connection. We're also going to engage in shadow work, working with different subpersonalities and parts through somatic practices and meditations. We're also going to be working with uncovering core beliefs, how to regulate your nervous system, and really just transform the emotional patterns in your life. The intellectual will focus on critical thinking and teachings on universal laws, the matrix control system, and various teachings on spiritual philosophy. And the spiritual is more strengthening your connection to the divine with prayer, with breath work, tapping into your intuition and your creative genius by aligning with divine will and living from your true self. So just quickly, some of the topics we cover. We cover topics like the process of embodiment, the path towards awakening, the hyperdimensional matrix control system, shadow work, working with triggers, projections, healing trauma in the nervous system, entity interferences, Wetiko, critical thinking, how to access the true self, universal laws, hermetic principles, how to create reality, conscious relationship skills. So we really have something for everyone in here, and we cover a lot of different bases. And this is going to be in 50 hours of video learning material. This is all original content recorded by myself or Bernhard. There's also over 7 hours of meditations and various spiritual practices, also guided by us. We also have a huge library of written material on different psychological and spiritual topics, structured with lessons and reflective questions and exercises. And they're really just a wide library of tools that you can apply now in any difficult situation to improve your knowledge of yourself, help your relationships, and improve the quality of your life. We're also going to be including 3 masterclasses with this: our Evolutionary Relationships Masterclass, the Hero's Journey Masterclass, and a masterclass on the body-mind connection and holistic health. So please keep in mind, this is a self-paced version of the program. While the content is the same as our live group program, it does not include live group calls or coaching. It's really meant to support independent learners. And while the total value is over $3,000, that's about what we charge for the group program, we are going to be selling this for a special sale price of $840 USD for the next 7 days. So please visit soulawakeningprogram.com to learn more and enroll. And this is really your invitation to use the friction of these times to work on yourself and become the person you're meant to be. The sale will end on July 15th. If you like our podcast, you're definitely going to love this program because we go into way more depth. We provide way more practical tools, and we hope some of you can be supported with this program during this time of transition.
All right, welcome to this podcast of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Now, in this 2-part series, we are diving into a very controversial but deeply relevant topic, and that's the topic of what is called NPCs, soulless humans, and agent Smiths, also known as organic portals in some of the teachings. They also referred to maybe as empty people or puppet people. So we want to explore what they are, where the concepts actually originated from, and also, most importantly, how it has been distorted in recent years. I actually wrote an extensive article on this subject over 14 years ago titled Organic Portals, Soulless Humans, which you can find on my website, veilofreality.com. It still remains the most read piece on my website, actually, with millions of views since 2011. It's consistently in the top 5. But to be clear, I didn't invent this concept. It's a synthesis of esoteric and metaphysical source material, which I've also cited in my article along with my commentary and insights. So it's actually great that this information is getting out there. It's a very important one, very deeply occult, esoteric one. But along with it, I've seen also an increase in distortions and really outright nonsense, especially in recent years on social media. That's definitely particularly obvious in some clickbait style posts and videos on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and also Instagram. What I've also seen over the past 4 or 5 or longer years is that many people have taken my exact words from the article, or they've taken quotes from that article, from that research material, which I cited, and then reposted them as their own without giving any credit neither to myself or the source material they quoted. So obviously this kind of plagiarism is beyond my control, and unfortunately that's just part of the world we live in. That's very common in this day and age. I have to say, ironically, people who just take information without sourcing it or crediting it act like NPCs themselves. They're kind of copy-pasting content they didn't write or create, yet pretending they did. Now, speaking of NPCs, some people may not be familiar with what NPCs are. Now, NPC stands for non-playable character. It's a term originally from video games, and in those video games, NPCs are basically characters that are not controlled by the player, but they follow scripts and have limited predictable responses. Now, in recent culture and internet culture, especially memes and online commentary, NPC has been used to describe people who are seen as either lacking independent thought, they are blindly following mainstream narratives, reacting in scripted or programmed ways, or confirming without critical thinking. Now, the idea is that such people behave like background characters, right, in the video game, going through the motions without any real self-awareness, depth, or even conscience. Now, while this term can be used humorously or metaphorically, it can also be dehumanizing when used to dismiss people's perspectives entirely. So it has been used a lot as an ad hominem attack, so to speak. Now, some of you, especially listeners to this podcast, may be familiar with the work of Tom Montag. We had him on in our podcast many times before. I highly recommend his work as well. He has written about this topic in an article called Spiritual as Humans, even before I did. He wrote this, I think, around in 2006, but he also drew from some of the same resource material that he also cites. So his work obviously has also been plagiarized. It is what it is. But given the growing popularity of this subject, Laura and I really want to address this topic in more depth. In particular, I will mostly lead this podcast because there's a lot of research I've done, and Laura will also pipe in with her insights and commentary through the 2 hours. But I want to just point out some of these misinterpretations, right? Because that have been floating around. They completely miss the spiritual depth and also the metaphysical nuance of this topic and the original material, right? Some others think that this concept is complete nonsense and there are no soulless humans. But that view is also based actually on false assumptions about this topic. Now, here are some common false claims and distortions I've seen floating around on very popular posts on social media about soulless humans, organic portals, or NPCs. Number one, I've seen that some people claim that these so-called soulless humans make up 70 up to 95% of humanity. And of course, the person who posted this is in the 5%. I've seen the assumption that they are all evil and psychopathic, that all narcissists are organic portals, that they are broken humans and have lost their connection to source or essence. That's actually also a false claim. One person even claimed that part of her mission is to help to these soulless humans to return to their humanness and reinstall the soul. So there you go. There's a starseed mission out for that as well. I've seen claims that anyone without an internal dialogue is an NPC or organic portal or soulless humans. That's been a big claim floating around. I've seen claims that these vessels were created by ancient alien AI. and also that people become NPCs or organic portals because of the vaccine or media programming. So these are some of the top 10, I guess, misperceptions, distortions really of this topic, and nonsense, I would say, as well. Because for the most part, they're really a superficial interpretation that completely miss the spiritual nuance of the original teachings around this concept. On some level, they can also lead to spiritual arrogance, false superiority, and really deeply damaging relationships when we start to blame or label others as organic portals prematurely. So this is why we really want to dedicate this two-part series in a more integral and grounded exploration of this topic. As I just hinted at, because of these distortions and oversimplifications, many people are carelessly labeling other people as NPCs, soulless humans, organic portals, to the point that I even had to put a disclaimer on my article not to come to premature conclusions, but still, while it is one of the most read articles, it's also one of the most abused and misunderstood topics I've seen. Because what happens is that people often project their own unresolved trauma or shadow material onto their spouse, children, coworkers, or anyone who doesn't mirror their beliefs or triggers them, because they blame that even their child or spouse is organic portal right away, interfering with my life and mission, right? When a lot of it could be easily explained through basic relationship psychology, shadow projections, triggers, trauma, and all of that. So really important to make this differentiation. But it is a tricky topic, since, as we will explore in this episode, some people close to us can be indeed organic portals and interfere with our process. Can be friends, family, spouse, all of that. Absolutely. However, we need to approach this topic with a deeper awareness and understanding so we don't mislabel, project, or abuse this topic due to our own ignorance. And also, to be clear, I do not claim to know everything about this topic, nor will we be able to cover everything, since it's a subject that requires a lot of nuance and depth. Now, in part one of this podcast, we go back to the main source where this topic kind of originated, and that's Boris Muravyev's Gnosis trilogy. It's an esoteric Christian teaching that describes two types of humanity. One Adamic man carries the divine spark, the potential for soul individuation and spiritual evolution. And there's pre-Adamic man who lacks higher centers and operates from a group soul consciousness. So Adamic man, pre-Adamic man are two humanities, comprising both of men and women, but they're two human, quote-unquote, races with different soul potential. And we will show how this metaphysical distinction has nothing to do with race, intelligence, behavior, nation, cultures, anything, right? It only has to do with soul potential. Then we also examine how this concept is echoed in the Casopian material, which introduces the term organic portal, a transitional being that mimics soul qualities but lacks the essence behind them. We also touch on how mainstream religion suppresses the topic of reincarnation and soul evolution, how this has become distorted, which ties into this topic as well, because in the ancient esoteric Christian teachings, the original Christian teachings also taught reincarnation and karma as well. Very interesting. But this suppression has also served as a matrix control mechanism to keep humanity dependent on kind of an external religious authority. So through part one, we will emphasize discernment, how even souled individuals also function as OPs. That's a very important concept to understand until they begin the inner work of awakening.
So just to let people know, OPs is what you're referring to as organic portals.
Correct, yeah.
Yes.
Or soulless humans, because people project all this externally. And one of the key concepts to understand, which we dive deeper, everybody is on the level of a quote-unquote soulless human organic portal until they consciously start to activate the higher centers, bring the soul to the front. We will explore that. Otherwise, there's a real danger of projection and spiritual ego, right, when this concept is misapplied, obviously. Now, in part two, which is always available for members, we dive deeper. You can always, if you're not a member of our membership podcast yet, then you can sign up at my website, veilofreality.com/membership. You have access to over 150 episodes. But in part two, we go deeper, right? We take this conversation much deeper into more the occult, so to speak, We look at how hyperdimensional forces, entities, archonic forces, hostile forces, also known as 4D service to self beings, can actually operate through NPCs or organic portals and interfere with the spiritual path. So there's truth in it, absolutely. It ties into the agent Smith syndrome and also what Muraviev calls the general law. And that's the way the Matrix pushes back through the people around us as we begin to wake up. So we want to explore that, absolutely. And there's another very controversial topic, and we want to also bring more balance into it objectively, but really address it as well, about the energetics of sexual seduction and this distinction between pre-Adamic and Adamic women, and how sexual energy is harvested and misused in 3D STS reality. So basically organic portals, females and souled females. And there's nuance in this whole subject as well, but we will need to understand, because one of the Matrix control mechanisms is really the distortion of sexual energy and all that. And then we tie all of that topic into deeper insights also from Rudolf Steiner and Sri Aurobindo, who talked in their own way how those without a developed real eye, established within themselves, or awakened psychic being, as Sri Aurobindo would said, can become unconscious vessels for adversarial or collective forces, sometimes also appearing human, but spiritually unformed and empty. So we can see this concept in various esoteric spiritual traditions, East and West. And ultimately, really, this series is about understanding the hidden architecture of reality and learning how to stay grounded, sincere, and connected to the divine, right? Everything has a teaching function. This is what we want to focus on. All right, so with that being said, here's something to think about. One of the most commonly shared spiritual truths is the idea that we are all one. And it's true from a higher level perspective, but that philosophical, spiritual, higher truth has also been used for spiritual bypassing or spiritual intellectual bypassing, right? Because based on this higher metaphysical understanding, we understand that everything is a creation of God. Everything is in the mind of God, right? Nothing can exist outside of God. And everything is interconnected, coming from the same source. But based on that understanding of we are all one, many people assume also that we are all the same, right? And that's simply not true. We assume that everyone must have a soul, a conscience, or even the capacity for empathy and emotional depth. And if someone usually doesn't show those qualities, the assumption is often, oh, well, they must have a wounded, traumatized childhood, they're unloved, they're simply misled, all these things. And that could be true, absolutely. But what if there's more to the story? What if that assumption is flawed, that we're inherently all the same inside? What if there exists a type of human being who by birth, and not by trauma, right? Not by genetics, inheritance or anything like that, but by birth has no connection to the what we call higher centers, the higher chakra, so to speak, of higher love, conscience, self-awareness, or other soul qualities. And again, not because of trauma or karmic blockages or childhood wounding, but simply because that capacity has not yet developed in their evolutionary cycle. So they cannot access these qualities. And because they don't exist within them at this stage, they can only mimic them, copy them, imitate them. So that means they can appear compassionate, they can appear empathetic, even spiritual, reflecting higher states of consciousness. They can reflect that, imitate them. They can say all the right things, reflect your inner light back to you. Even soul qualities, they can reflect them back to you. And they seem deeply attuned, but they may be even very intelligent, high IQ, very charming, and very successful. But behind that mask, that personality, there's no true self with a capital S, no soul presence, no individualized I am. And again, these individuals may not be strangers. They may be family members, co-workers, lovers, even your spouse, right? They may be popular spiritual teachers, celebrities, politicians, CEOs, influencers, or scientists who dominate the public narrative because, as we explore in this podcast as well, these pre-Adamic type humans, organic portals, are better adapted to the material world than actually souled individuals, interestingly. Now, again, and that's the big misconception, it does not imply that they are automatically evil or psychopaths unlike any form of emotions. That's another extreme false assumption and one of the distortions about this topic we just mentioned, right? But here's another issue to consider. True spiritual work, psycho-spiritual work, inner work, esoteric knowledge, and spiritual knowledge can only be truly grasped and applied by a certain type of human being that has soul potential. The other type, in their current stage of evolution, simply does not possess the capacity. So the one type has a soul, or more precisely, as we will explore, has soul potential, and the other is in a sense soulless, meaning the higher centers are not activated and they cannot activate them. Outwardly, again, there's no difference. Both may appear equally human in terms of personality, behavior, intelligence, but their inner constitutions, their essence is fundamentally different. And again, this is not a matter of superiority or inferiority. Both types are part of a larger evolutionary process, each playing a role within it. It's a natural function of the evolution of consciousness. It's not a mistake. They are not broken, none of that. And we'll explore that as well. All right. The concept of the soul obviously is central to many religions, philosophies, but the question always arises, what exactly is the soul, and does every human being actually have one? All right. So let's begin with Boris Muravyev's esoteric teachings in Gnosis. So a little background on Muravyev's in his book, The Gnosis Trilogy, which has had a big impact on my life. I've read it over 15 years ago, studied it deeply. And just to give some background on Muravyev himself, he was a Russian esotericist and scholar who, after escaping the Russian Revolution, went on to teach Eastern Christian esotericism at the University of Geneva. He's considered actually the lesser known but significant figure linked to Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, often referred to as the third man in the triad. So I've also read a lot of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. Now, Muravyev was building on what Ouspensky called fragments of an unknown teaching, as he wrote about in his book In the Search of the Miraculous, based on Gurdjieff's work. Now, Gurdjieff's work is also informed by esoteric Christianity, in fragments, also the Egyptian mystery school, Sufism, but Muravyev has really put it into a more structured form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've referenced his work before a few times in your work as well.
Exactly,
right?
So it ties somewhat into Gurdjieff's work, who also draws from the esoteric Christianity.
And so what exactly is esoteric Christianity? It's separate from all the other forms of Christianity,
exactly.
correct?
So I'm exactly going to address that right now. Perfect, yeah. It's important to understand that's different from what we consider mainstream Christianity and the religion of Christianity.
Yeah.
So Muravyev basically claimed that he has recovered and transmitted the complete system of esoteric Christianity, which he presented it in this 3-volume of Gnosis. So each volume represents one stage of spiritual process. Volume 1 is the exoteric teaching, introducing foundationalist concepts. Volume 2, the mesoteric teaching, focused on inner work and practical methods. And Volume 3 is the esoteric teaching, revealing deeper spiritual truths and the hidden inner traditions. Now, it's very important to understand that Muravyev's Gnosis is not related to Gnosticism or what Gnostics taught. I heard this a lot when I mention it. People claim that I'm a Gnostic and why I reference Gnostic teaching. Muravyev's Gnosis has nothing to do with Gnosticism. It's a transmission of an ancient Christian esoteric tradition that has been suppressed for over 1,800 years and was only preserved in oral secrecy, right? And esoteric sense, the word gnosis actually stems from Greek, and it refers to the inner realization of a truth that liberates the soul and reveals our divine origin and purpose. So it's more related to embodied experiential experience of the divine. That's what gnosis hints at. So together, these 3 volumes offer a very structured system for spiritual transformation, and they're deeply rooted in ancient Christian esoteric tradition, which is not to be mistaken for the mainstream Christian religions such as Catholicism, even Orthodoxy, which has become more popular, or Evangelicism and so forth, right? All the split of religions, for reasons we also address shortly. Now, let's look into the teaching itself, where he talks about 2 types of humanities, right? Adamic man and pre-Adamic man. Now, according to Gnosis, Adamic man, and again, Adamic man is not gender, it's just a type of human, so it includes both male and female. Adamic man has been infused with the breath of spirit, the divine spark. He possesses the higher centers, right? Though they are dormant after the fall. We address that shortly, what that means. And he carries the potential to awaken, evolve, and become an individuated soul through esoteric spiritual work. Now, pre-Adamic man, on the other hand, lacks the divine spirit. He has no higher centers, no true individuality, no capacity for spiritual involution in this current cycle. In a sense, he's animated but not ensouled, meaning he has no real I that would resemble an individual soul. So according to those teachings, based on Christian revelation, right, pre-Adamic humans were already present on Earth before the emergence of Adamic humanity. According to the esoteric teachings, when Adam and Eve experienced the fall and were expelled from the Garden of Eden, they entered the world populated by pre-Adamic beings who lacked an individualized soul or higher centers. Now, in the esoteric tradition, the fall symbolizes a descent from direct connection with the divine, the higher centers, into a state of ego consciousness, dominated by the lower three centers, the intellectual, emotional, and kind of motor and instinctual sexual centers. Now, for Adamic man, that human race, the descent resulted in the dormancy of the higher centers, not their total loss. So these centers can be reactivated through conscious esoteric work and psychospiritual development, right? That brings the soul to the throne and connects you with your essence again. However, pre-Adamic humans, by conscious, do not possess the same latent higher centers. They operate from group or soul or collective psyche consciousness, and their current incarnation lacks the seed of individualized spirit necessary for conscious evolution towards the divine. They cannot activate higher centers because these centers are simply not present in their structure. And again, the difference is not external. Nothing, you cannot differentiate in personality types, gender, race, any of that. Both types may appear equally intelligent, emotional, or spiritual, but only one has the seed of the real I. So it's very important to understand then Adamic man is not born awake. So the higher centers are shut down, so to speak, but has this seed of an individual soul, which he can basically grow, as Gurdjieff would say. You can grow the soul, or as Sri Aurobindo would say, to bring the soul, the psychic being, through the front. So they're latent, but they can only be activated via conscious psychospiritual work, so to speak.
So pre-Adamic humans are the organic portals.
Exactly,
And the Adamic mans are the ones who have soul potential.
Exactly.
Okay.
The term organic portal comes from the Cassiopeia material, links to the pre-Adamic, which we'll talk about shortly. Yeah. So also only Adamic man can reincarnate and progress through multiple lifetimes as part of the soul evolutionary journey. Pre-Adamic men do not reincarnate. They have a specific soul group collective field reincarnation process. But this brings me to a very important topic as well, which I want to address, which we should address. And this is the topic of reincarnation. And as you can see, if we read Gnosis based on esoteric Christianity from over 1800 years ago, the deeper, true esoteric Christian teachings acknowledged reincarnation. They acknowledged soul evolution. They acknowledged karma, right? The soul processes from lifetime and lifetime learns its lessons. But this whole topic of reincarnation has been completely rejected in mainstream Christianity, including Catholicism, Christian Orthodoxy, Protestantism, all the split of religions. They don't recognize reincarnation, right? Soul evolution is also not recognized. Each soul lives only one life, followed by judgment in the afterlife, right?
Do they even believe in the soul? I don't hear. I mean, they use the language.
They believe in the soul in the sense that it, goes to heaven after they die.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But not that something evolves over time. Karma is also not acknowledged. Actions may have moral consequences, but there's no basic doctrine of karma, of cause and effect over lifetimes. Usually in mainstream Christianity, after death, you'll be judged, right? And there's a final destination, even heaven, hell, or purgatory. And then the concept of sin, right? Sin is a moral transgression against God's law. There's original sin and personal sin based on mainstream Christianity. And also that human nature has fallen due to Adam and Eve's disobedience. And most often Eve is being blamed, right? For eating the apple. Everything is so literal. But all are born in sin, right? You're naturally born in sin. And the goal also from that perspective is salvation, but not soul development. There's only one lifetime to repent, believe in Christ, be saved by him, receive grace, or go to hell. In a very generalized nutshell. Now, fascinating, the esoteric Christian view, as Boris Muraviev taught in Gnosis, reincarnation is affirmed, right? The soul evolves through multiple lifetimes. Most humans have not yet formed a permanent soul, which ties into the topic of soulless humans or pre-Adamics. this in soul evolution is central. That's the goal of esoteric work, to develop a stable, conscious, real I through inner work across incarnations. Karma is also recognized, right, over lifetimes. And it's about inner alchemy and conscious self-work are the key of escaping basically the cycle and aligning with divine will and divine law. So sin, from the esoteric Christian perspective, is a deviation from divine law and the mechanical behavior rooted in the lower nature in ego, identification with ego. So sin is not a moral failure, but just simply a spiritual ignorance, right? So it doesn't have this guilt-shame programming like the corrupted mainstream religion. It's more unconsciousness based. Sin is basically based on unconsciousness of one's true nature and instead alignment with the ego personality. So, and the consequences of sin accumulate and carry over lifetimes and can be worked out according to the law of karma and all of that. So it's really fascinating how the suppression of reincarnation and soul evolution is so present in mainstream Christian religions. And I would argue that this is a matrix program and a great example of how spiritual teachings, religious teachings have been used for social control, distorted, corrupted over millennia. Because the early Christian schools, again, across the board, did teach reincarnation, soul evolution, and inner transformation by inner work. But those teachings were actually condemned and erased, most notably around 533 AD with the Second Council of Constantinople, where the teachings of pre-existence of souls and reincarnation were declared heretical, right?
Wow.
And we know this. The Bible is one of the most edited, quote-unquote, scriptures out there, right? There's the saying, if God wrote the Bible, the devil edited them, or the Satan edited them. But the editing of scriptures and burning of esoteric texts during the formation of institutional Christianity ensured that only the outer authoritarian doctrine remained, right? Basically saying the Bible is the word of God, you must follow it. It's the authority. Now, by removing these teachings, obviously religious institutions created a one-shot salvation model based on obedience, fear, guilt, shame, and an external authority, putting a God outside of yourself, separate from yourself, turning God into a judge, right, rather than a loving and intelligence guiding evolution over incarnations. It makes more people dependent on the church for salvation. Right? It also shows how hostile forces infiltrate religions. Rudolf Steiner, Sri Aurobindo, and others have talked about how hostile forces, Azuric beings, Ahrimanic beings, work through dogmatic religions, have corrupted religions over ages and turned it into an authoritarian theology. And we see this especially nowadays with the resurgence of a very dogmatic, authoritarian Christian type religion. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's just on the side point. I can go deeper and deeper into all of this, but really to understand that reincarnation and karma and soul evolution has been a central part of the early esoteric Christian teachings, and they have been taken out, edited out, and turned into something more controlling, so to speak. Okay, so we talked about Adamic man. Now let's go to pre-Adamic man, the soulless human, so to speak, in this cycle, right? So the pre-Adamic man, human, does not possess an individualized higher center. We just talked about this. They only function through the instinctive center, right? The sexual, physical center, the lower emotional center, and the lower intellectual center, as Moraviev talked about. Basically, they lack the inner structure necessary for esoteric development. They cannot access higher knowledge, higher love, higher levels of consciousness. Again, not due to trauma, but because that capacity simply hasn't emerged yet in their spiritual evolution. So there's nothing wrong with them. They function collectively, not individually, and similar to a group of souls in animals, or as Moraviev hinted at as well. So they can mimic soul qualities, right? Reflecting the energy of a nearby soul-bearing person, but it's imitation, not true essence. And in context of reincarnation, they do not reincarnate individually because obviously they lack individualized soul complex necessary for the process. Ties also what Gurdjieff talked about, where not all humans possess a permanent, what he calls second body, etheric body, and those without it simply disintegrate after death. However, they do incarnate repeatedly as an extension of a collective being. And this is what Moraviev talks about also in Gnosis, right? basically they are part of a collective real I, a real self, which governs vast group of pre-Adamic humans, like hive soul groups, right? And these groups are organized by race, civilization, or subcultural lineages. And this collective personality can evolve, what he says can be evolved or dark, meaning they can also manifest at different levels of development or consciousness within that soul group. But the evolution is collective, not individual. So while an individual pre-Adamic person doesn't reincarnate with a continuous soul memory or karmic path, the group soul or collective I of a group of pre-Adamic humans does reincarnate through different vessels across generations and cultures, right? So they are also adapted better to the material world and can be more successful in material terms. We talk about this shortly as well. But ultimately, and I'll address that more, the lesson of pre-Adamic soul groups that over time, they will start to crystallize in individualized soul and over many incarnations then start to become more of an souled individual.
So there can be a potential experience, maybe it's a little bit rare, of pre-Adamic man becoming more ensouled throughout a lifetime. Like, for example, say you have like a pre-Adamic man that is maybe genuinely engaged in spiritual practice in their own way, meditating or whatever. Is it possible for them to develop into like a more Adamic man in a single lifetime with time and effort and intention?
I would say the way I understand this is even within pre-Adamic humans, there are different levels.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Some are more collective, some. And the whole point of the mimicry, which we talk about, is a lot of them also mimic spiritual ideals and whatnot. And that maybe is their way of learning, actually. Through the mimicry. Like a child learns.
But maybe it's like one of those things that, like, for people, it can feel like a bit hollow or empty or shallow when they're mimicking it rather than like a true.
Exactly, because they don't really experience that. They literally just mimic it.
It's just coming from like the lower intellectual.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Hence, they can feel fake or off or empty and these kind of things.
But for the most part, it's relatively rare for like, it's almost like there's like a spark in the heart which contains the soul, which like maybe is like a tiny, tiny flicker at first. And then eventually it grows into like a more solid fire, I guess you could say.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what Ravi talks about, fusing the magnetic center through the fire within.
Oh, right? Interesting. Yeah, because that's how I've experienced it in like my own awakening experiences, is like there's definitely an opening and a charging of the divine into the heart that develops over time through spiritual work.
And the most important thing to understand, which we'll address even in more depth when we go more into the material as we go along, is that both Adamic man, souled human being, is on the same level, even the same level of consciousness like pre-Adamic man, until he or she actively engages in psychospiritual work.
Oh, interesting.
Turns towards divine and engages in the work to activate the higher centers.
So basically there's not a lot of difference between a pre-Adamic man and Adamic man who hasn't engaged in any inner work. Wow, interesting. Okay.
They have the potential for soul evolution, but if it is not activated...
So would that explain, kind of why... Because I know a lot of us, we grew up and maybe we went along with social conditioning, what everyone else was doing. We were more like hooked into the mainstream. Is that us more kind of expressing our pre-Adamic state?
Yeah, the pre-Adamic state, you can think of it, is also just, you can be a souled individual, which is severely conditioned, programmed, wounded, traumatized, just operating from ego consciousness on the lower three levels. And the others are there, but they're dormant and closed off.
Okay, got it.
You can relate it to the chakra model as well, by the way. From the chakra model, the pre-Adamic man operates primarily through the lower three chakras, not primarily, but only through the three lower chakras: root, sacral, pleasure, sexuality, solar plexus, power will, but has no access to the upper chakras, heart, throat, third eye, crown, and cannot activate them either in this lifetime.
But you just said that they could potentially, it begins like as a flicker.
I know. That's my interpretation.
Okay.
I haven't read that
But
yet.
you just said that earlier when I was asking you that.
Yeah, that's also my insight into that as well. Because over time, as a collective soul, they gain more experience and at some point may afflict them, and then maybe at some point in their incarnation and more individuated spark is being reincarnated as well, right? But for the most part, we're understanding that pre-Adamic man, these humans have no access to the higher center. Very important to understand.
Even if they had like a very powerful experience of love, like an extraordinary experience, like not something common.
No, they would not have it. That's really important to understand. That's why it will also explain why some people, even in medicine journeys, don't have that experience. I have met some individuals like that.
I know people
right?
with
that doesn't.
psychedelics.
They're simply not wired. Nothing can change it. It's just not inherent.
Interesting.
So we need to really understand that.
Yeah.
Now it goes into something even deeper, right? Because after the fall from Adamic, from its original state into ego personality, after the fall from Eden, right, so to speak, according to Gnosis, Adamic man has lost the connection to the higher centers and is identifying with the false I, the ego personality. And here's something very interesting. According to Gnosis, after the fall, Adamic and pre-Adamic humans' races intermingled, leading to what he calls the pollution of the bloodline. It's very common, that saying, but that has also been very misused this term. So the pollution in the bloodline in a symbolic, energetic sense. In this fallen state, Adamic man, sold into human, became indistinguishable from pre-Adamic man, operating only from the lower centers. But this pollution of the bloodline and the idea of true humanity has been known in various other traditions throughout history, but has also been misused and misinterpreted through racial, nationalistic, and elitist ideologies. You see this concept in the untouchables in India, right? You know about this, the traditional Hindu caste system. The untouchables were considered spiritually impure and socially untouchable, right? Originally, I think that may have actually reflected a symbolic understanding of this inner spiritual capacity, but was more perverted into rigid, oppressive caste hierarchy that became like externalized judgment based on birth, but not essence. You see it similar in the ancient Greece concept of the Helots, their Untermensch, Nazi Germany. Nazis labeled entire groups and races as Untermenschen or subhumans, unworthy of life and dignity, and so forth. So that has been abused over the ages, but in truth, this is also important to understand, Adamic and pre-Adamic types, souls and sold and soulless types, spread across all races, all nations, all social classes. They can even exist within the same family. Some may be sold, maybe unsold, including siblings, parents, children. The distinction is purely metaphysical. It's not physical, it's not racial, it's not religious, it's not national, it's not even genetic. So, with that being said, it's really important to create this foundational understanding so we don't have any misconceptions. So there are certain implications for the spiritual path, for the spiritual seeker, right? So until Adamic man, the souled human being, starts engaging in conscious inner work, as I just mentioned, he or she is effectively functioning at the same level as pre-Adamic human or soulless human, or what the Kazopians would call organic portal. So in that sense, like you mentioned, yes, everybody begins actually as an NPC or quote-unquote soulless human, disconnected from the higher centers and the real I, and mostly driven by the lower nature, the conditioned ego personality, lower chakras, parental, social, cultural programming, which can also turn souled individuals into NPCs, by the way.
That's maybe where like the high number of like 80 to 90% maybe comes from, because you have like the pre-Adamic man and the Adamic man who's not engaged in psychospiritual work. If you combine those together, that's actually probably the majority of humanity.
That's a very good point. I think it ties maybe into the map of consciousness, what David Hawkins said of 80%.
80-20, yeah.
80-20, right? The difference, again, is only whether the person has an inherent soul potential. But soul potential to awaken doesn't mean that you're awake, right? So this potential only exists in the Adamic human race, who can undertake intentional esoteric development, psychospiritual work, connect to the higher centers in a conscious way, and build an integrated soul capable of divine union and alignment with divine will. But again, the presence of soul potential cannot be measured by IQ, by morality, by success in the world or family life or any other appearance. Even spiritual appearance can be deceptive, right? Many who seem spiritual may also seemingly be mimicking soul behavior, but can never have a spiritual experiences without a real connection to the real I. So, to take away from this segment is really important. Adamic man, souled humans is indistinguishable from pre-Adamic man, soulless human. We are all organic portals in that sense, soulless humans or NPCs, until we begin the process of soul activation, individuation, to bring the soul to the front and make it the master and not the conditioned ego personality. So this is one of the most important parts to understand. Now, this ties into another very interesting material, the Casopian material, which introduced the term organic portals, also referencing Moravia's work, pre-Adamic humans and Adamic humans, and going a bit deeper with it, offering a more insight into spiritual evolution, hyperdimensional interferences, and the hidden nature of reality. So just on a side note, this Casopian material, I was interested in it and studied it back then in the 90s and early 2000s, along with other so-called channel material. It's somewhat similar to the raw material, Law of One. It shares a comparable cosmology, also speaking about different densities and the dynamic between STS, service to self, and STO, service to others. Now, the whole topic on channel material is a whole subject in itself. There are many different types and qualities, of course, yes. I'm not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Especially in the New Age space, though, it can be a can of worms. Lots of questionable claims out there. In my experience, any channel eventually over time becomes distorted, quote unquote hacked over time. It's just, or through the filter of whoever it's coming through. No channel material contains 100% truth, and it's just the nature of this kind of transmission, right? Personally, I haven't followed any channel material literally since 2012 or something. I'm focusing more on grounded psycho-spiritual work and practices, as you guys know from our work anyway. Having said that, that material is, in the Casopian material, is really fascinating. And I'm also quoting it in my article from 14 years ago. It emerged in the mid-90s, and it does offer valuable insight into this topic, especially in light of Moravia's gnosis and connecting these dots, so to speak. It gives a more nuanced view. So the Casopian's material introduces the term of an organic portal. And these are humans who appear biologically and socially normal but lack an individuated soul, like pre-Adamic men, right? They're also animated by a group soul structure like animals. So they kind of confirm what Moravia wrote about in Gnosis. They only exist at the lower centers. Souled humans, Adamic, possess the latent real, a divine seed, and also are capable of esoteric awakening and soul individuation if they engage in the work. So they confirm all of this, matching Moravia's claim that only Adamic humans have the possibility of uniting the low and higher centers. Now, both, I think, Moravia and Casopians set the number about 50-50% human souled individuals and unsouled individuals. But by the nature, mostly organic portals and pre-Adamic man kind of mingle with each other, and souled individuals more mingle with each other. So they almost by resonance, by their inner capacity, attract more of this similar. Having said that, we'll talk about this later. There can be hyperdimensional interference, and these organic portals can be used by portals as portals from other forces trying to distract souled individuals from the work.
That's an interesting point. So does that like explain why sometimes when you're going through your own spiritual awakening process, maybe you haven't activated the higher centers, but you begin to engage in psychological or spiritual work and you start to activate these centers. And then when you start to talk about it to some of your more conditioned friends who are kind of going along with the mainstream programming, they look at you like you're alien, like
Exactly.
It's so weird and so out there for them.
There might be
like it's like almost outside their ability to perceive that you're having these experiences. Because I've had that happen, not recently, but like, over a decade ago when I first started getting into yoga and meditation.
That's a very good point. I can relate to that as well. Maybe when a soul individual who has not done the work, actively engaged in it, hasn't had an awakening experience, is naturally surrounded more by soulless humans, by organic portals, by design, because they're on the same level. Then they activate it, and then people don't get you. Right? But then again, that's a fine distinction. They may be, yes, organic portals as well, or they may be a soul individual who just haven't activated yet. Right? So we don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So that's why the labeling is very, very tricky.
Yeah.
Now, interesting, the Casopian material mentioned that organic portals, pre-Adamic humans, in the context of the evolution of consciousness, just graduated from the animal kingdom, from second density. So in that cosmology, second density is plant animal kingdom. Third density is a human experience. Fourth density is more spiritual experience. And it can be both service to self, service to others, the duality. But according to that information, pre-Adamic man, organic portals literally just graduated their essence, their consciousness from the animal kingdom. So they also still, quote unquote, reincarnate as soul groups, similar like animals in their first incarnations, until the soul becomes more and more refined and individualized. So in that sense, OPs, organic portals, soulless humans, function as a transitional stage between group soul animals and individuated soul-bearing humans. Meaning the group soul is more advanced than that of animals, but yet not yet individualized, so to speak. You can see this in the sense that they serve as a biological vessel through which collective soul structure gains complexity and experience via mimicking and all of that what we talked about, preparing for future individuation in another cycle. So think of them as organic portals or soulless humans as soul incubators, testing and refining form, personality, and behavior, in a sense, in preparation for eventual soul implementation in a later evolutionary round. Does that make sense? So
just kind of trying being a human out and like seeing what kind of soul they want to be.
But there's no self-awareness, understand. It's very mechanical, right?
Got it,
Hence the NPC-ness, right?
Yeah.
It's like an organism. A lot of animals are very mechanical too.
Well, yeah, they even say, I've heard other spiritual teachers say that when you take an animal, like say if you like adopt a wild animal, right? You take it out of the group soul and then you infuse it with soul, with love.
Yeah.
Like, so that makes it have a more individual nature.
Yeah. But don't try, you cannot make organic portals into souled humans like some people.
You can't apply that. So. I'm just saying that you can take an animal out of a group soul and infuse it with an individual consciousness.
Yeah. With some, more higher frequencies and all that. But yeah, we need to be careful that they cannot be, because that's a lot of people try to change them, and that's the issue. Not to mistake that. And also not judging them. We'll talk about this. It's nothing evil about them, right? In a sense, they help anchor physical reality by also maintaining the consensus frequency, ensuring social continuity. They're often very well adapted to material life because that's all they know. They only live on, resonate on, view the world through the first three chakras, right? They don't have, we'll talk about this shortly as well, a soul struggle like souled individuals. Hence, they are better adapted in everyday life, and they excel in, you see it everywhere, business, politics, law, education, science, entertainment, right? So again, how do they evolve? How do they learn? By mimicking emotional, cognitive, and spiritual behaviors of soul-bearing individuals, right? They begin, like you just said, to quote-unquote learn the script of higher being, much like a child imitates an adult before internalizing meaning, right? So in a sense, OPs become soul embryos or proto-humans, not yet ensouled individuals, but energetically almost rehearsing for it. So you can see it that way. So what that means, most importantly, and to debunk a very important point, organic portals, soulless humans, NPCs, they are not evil. They're also not broken or pathological. That's one of the most common distortions, right? They're not equivalent to narcissists, sociopaths, or psychopaths, right? Well, yes, some narcissists or sociopaths may be organic portals, but not all organic portals exhibit pathological behavior. That's very important to understand. According to Cosmopolitan material, psychopaths are malfunctioning, pre-Adamic, so to speak, essentially corrupted or failed OPs, but it's just a small minority. You have to understand that most organic portals, soulless humans, whatever you may call them, I think soulless humans, the word itself gives a very almost evil negative connotation if the concept is not understood in a more nuanced metaphysical way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what I think stems from how people project that into that. Soulless means evil. No, but most of them are well adapted, functional, socially integrated. They are the salt of the earth. They can be very kind, helpful, intelligent, charismatic in a positive sense, without any hidden agendas or evil intentions, right? So very important to know mind. Again, the key difference, they just lack an individual soul in a higher centers that would allow them for deeper spiritual self-awareness and a divine connection. But that doesn't make them automatically evil, narcissistic, or psychopathic. Number 2, misconception. Organic portals are not broken. There's nothing, they didn't lose anything. There's nothing wrong with them. They are functioning as designed, divine design. They aren't missing something due to trauma, abuse, or DNA corruption, as I heard as well. Their structure is different by nature and by divine design, not by damage, error, there's no error, or genetic manipulation. again, the expression of a group soul like animals, and here to serve an important transitional function in the context of the evolution of consciousness. They are not here to awaken or evolve spiritual in this cycle. It also ties into the splitting of humanity we talked about, right? That there are billions of people, some with soul potential, some without, and with different soul lessons, right? That's really what it comes down to. And also important to understand, everyone, including you listener, if you're with anybody who's soul potential or soul, was an OP once in their evolutionary journey. Like you were even in Namibia or some connected to the ocean at some point, like a little cell in the context of the evolution of consciousness, right? So every soul-bearing human today has passed to the organic portal stage in an earlier evolutionary cycle. So from that perspective, organic portals, soulless humans are not inferior. They're simply younger on the evolutionary path. They're being prepared for future individuation. So that's the time we're in right now. So what does it mean for the spiritual seeker, especially this topic? Most important, do not label without consideration. Too many people too fast label others as organic portals.
Or like maybe rather reflect on your own journey in this, like when you started to awaken the higher centers, or like how you could focus on your own individuation process rather than, looking on the outside who's an organic portal or not.
Exactly. And understanding this is organic portals, soulless humans, not a mistake. They are part of creation. Now, the true spiritual maturity involves recognizing their function in the bigger context, in the context of evolution of consciousness. So the moment you see them as lesser, evil, or just matrix agents without nuance only fuels your spiritual ego, most often maybe based on your own projections, assumptions, and especially considering how many wounded individuals who are actually souls in struggle, as have been mislabeled as organic portals. So we need to be really careful not to prematurely label individuals as OPs. I've stopped this a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's not even necessary for reasons I'll talk about shortly. So don't jump to conclusions. If even some of the material, the resources I've mentioned say that do not start labeling without due consideration. Very often the individual who displays contradictory behavior, or quote what we call like soul lacking behavior, may be literally a soul being in struggle, right? Mm-hmm. What are soul people in struggle? People dealing with trauma, childhood wounding, ego entrapment, all kinds of severe social, parental conditioning programming. They can appear soulless, even like an NPC through extreme official culture, media programming, but still possess soul potential. Just like narcissists or some sociopaths can also have developed that due to wounding and extreme trauma, but that doesn't mean that they're soulless. Right?
Yeah.
So observation is key. Because again, the best functioning OPs are nearly indistinguishable from souled individual and can only be discerned through long-term observation, number one, in person, and deeper psychic energetic awareness, not going through a checklist style, like based on surface behavior or just on social media seeing a picture or video of somebody, right?
Yeah. And by the way, just to be clear, when you say OPs, that's just short. What we're using is short term for organic portal.
Yeah, that's what yes, exactly. Soulless humans, pre-Adamic man, all the same. Different words for the same concept here. The biggest danger is also for people, especially in the truther movement or even spiritual movement, who are not really sincerely engaged in inner psycho-spiritual work. They can easily project their own shadow, their own wounds onto other people and blame them for being organic portals, right? So unless you're really engaged in deeper psycho-spiritual work yourself and are more aware of your own stuff, shadow, traumas, you won't definitely not be able to tell the difference, because unconsciously you will project that onto another person. It can lead to spiritual arrogance, right, and all of that, or some even relationship stuff. When something happens in a relationship stuff and you think your partner or somebody's interfering, it's an organic portal, he or she's interfering with my spiritual work. Well, maybe this is just basic relationship psychology coming up, triggers, mother-father wounds, animus projections. Doesn't mean the other person is an OP. Right?
Yeah. So
we need to be clear about that. But again, also, key frame to understand, to just bring that down in the first hour, everyone starts out as an organic portal or soulless humans. Most people live in a mechanical state, mostly driven by the ego personality. Most people are NPCs. There are even people in the truther movement, NPCs, who just mechanically narrate or repeat what's the latest outrage or group you should project on. Right?
Yeah.
So you see this in any group, really. None of us is above the influence of Matrix, right? Unless we have begun to awaken more consciously, so to speak. And now so that's very important to lay out the foundation. Now in part 2, we're going to go way deeper into some other metaphysical considerations in light of the organic portal topic, because that ties deeply into what is called the Agent Smith syndrome. Now, we have explored now in the first hour the foundational framework on the pre-organic portal, soulless human concept based on Moravie's gnosis, pre-Adamic man, right? The split between Adamic and pre-Adamic humanity. We have clarified the distortions, warned against projection and generalized, oversimplified labeling others as such. But there's another layer, deeper layer to this phenomenon that reveals just how deeply embedded these forces are in our reality. And that's the matrix forces, the hyperdimensional matrix forces. And that also ties into the topic how the matrix actively resists that awakening. And that resistance often comes through the people closest to us. So there's truth in that, for sure. So in part 2, we're going to dive into what Moraviev called the general law. That's also a concept from esoteric Christianity, basically describing the matrix control system.
Yeah, I just want to add, because I've had this question for lots of people on Instagram. Part 2 is always paid on our podcast. You can sign up for $11 a month. You go to veilofreality.com/membership or cosmicmatrix.com, and you can cosmicmatrixpodcast.com, and you can sign up for part 2. But part 2 is not a separate free podcast. We have a part 2 for every podcast, only available for members. I've gotten that question a few times, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. And obviously, if you really enjoy our work, we would appreciate your support. Yeah, going back to in the second hour, we dive deeper into, again, what Moraviev called the general law. That's a term from esoteric Christianity, which described the matrix control system, really, right? It's a force that's designed to keep humanity unconscious in its place and to pull the seeker back into mechanical life the moment they begin to move towards truth. But this force doesn't just only work through our internal distractions or temptations, but it works through other people, especially those who are still asleep or lack soul individuation. So this ties into the concept of the popular Agent Smith syndrome, right? Inspired by the Matrix. And that's a deeply ancient esoteric concept that describes how individuals still plugged into the system, people who may seem kind, normal, even deeply spiritual, right, can suddenly become instruments or interference when your awakening begins to threaten the matrix, right? It's not just a metaphor, it's a real psychic dynamic, and it is mirrored in the esoteric tradition, especially gnosis. So that's also the origin of the term of where the Agent Smith syndrome originated from, so to speak, which a lot of people talk about. And organic portals, soulless humans, pre-Adamic man, women can act as Agent Smith portals. That's where that ties into it, right? So we explore how this hyperdimensional interference can work through organic portals, right? Who become conduits for all kinds of manipulation, also energy harvesting. Often comes in form of emotional entanglement, spiritual confusion, also sexual seduction. Speaking on that topic, now that's a big one. We will also dive into that. It's a very provocative, I would say, section of this discussion. The temptation of pre-Adamic women, quote-unquote organic portals women, who have not an individuated soul, only operate on the lower centers, but who are portals to sexually harvest soul energy. So Moraviev talks about this topic in Gnosis, describing how some of the most physically beautifully women on the planet, particularly those without soul essence, can act as energetic lures to siphon the life force energy from souled men. And that doesn't mean always that all women are evil, nor is it about blaming women, right? I'm going to be very clear, and we will be very clear about this when we talk about this in the second hour. Most are entirely unaware of it. But we need to understand the mechanics of mechanical seduction without essence. This is essential to the matrix architecture, especially in the world flooded with social media, porn, spiritual narcissism, all kinds of artificial goddess energy that's being sexualized and that mimics the divine feminine but lacks real substance. Again, the distortions of sexual energy is one of the prime control mechanisms of the matrix. So To balance it, we also look how traumatized souled women can unconsciously misuse their sexual energy, become conduits for the same forces through their unhealed wounds, attention seeking, or manipulation. And then after that, we tie all this topic of what we learned from Boris Moraviev, pre-Adamic man, Adamic man, organic portals, soulless humans, tie this into the teachings of Rudolf Steiner, who also spoke of an undeveloped I in many people and how adversal forces can work through these under-individuated individuals. And also, we'll also revisit Sri Aurobindo's insights from the integral yoga into the psychic being, the soul being, so to speak, and the mechanical nature of most humans' actions, also showing how those without a strong soul center can easily become vehicles for collective or hostile forces. So all that ties into the same topic, specifically the Agent-Smith syndrome from a deeper occult esoteric perspective. So ultimately, part 2 is about understanding how this control mechanism operates through relationships, sexuality, subtle influences, the Agent-Smith syndrome, but more importantly, about how to meet these challenges as well, right? Radical self-responsibility, discernment, and really understanding the bigger teaching function in the context of the evolution of consciousness. So again, if you're not a member yet and want access to part 2, go to my website, veilofreality.com/membership, and then you'll have also access to over 150 episodes, part 2s. And we'll be right back. Thank you for listening.